Welcome to Fiction and Focus, a podcast where we explore the craft of writing without taking ourselves too seriously. I'm Nathan Harms.
And I'm Wesley Watts. Each episode, we'll discuss uplifting topics like the soul-crushing pressure of expectations, the suffocating grip of self-doubt, and the swift-kicking unmentionables of rejection.
We'll share our experiences, struggles, and heartaches in the hope that you might find some small measure of comfort in our collective misery, or at least have a laugh at our expense.
So grab a pen, paper, and your favorite writing snack, and join us as we put fiction in focus. All right, welcome word nerds to another episode of Fiction in Focus, where a couple of guys just talk nonsense at you for like an hour. I'm Wesley Watts.
That's like a short episode right there.
It's getting that way, isn't it? So I'm Wesley Watts. We got Nathan Harms here, and today we are talking about one of my favorite topics, dialogue.
We're going to talk about it?
We're going to talk about it. Yeah, we're going to talk about talking.
We're going to talk about writing about talking.
Yeah. Most of these topics that we discuss, like, I've seen a lot of stuff online about it because I watch a lot of content and how to and stuff like that to get other people's perspective. And a lot of times these other subjects, I see a lot of bad advice mixed in with the good advice.
Right.
One cool thing about dialogue is it all seems to be pretty good advice out there. I don't know that I've seen much bad advice, just different perspectives on how to go about it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, until we talk about it.
Right. That's what we're here for. We found a gap in the market. Now, this might be my bias because I really enjoy writing dialogue. But I actually feel like it's one of my strengths. So it's probably my bias.
It's fun to write dialogue, though. It's how you bring your characters to life, right?
It's actually, it's my favorite thing. Like when I'm getting to a scene with a lot of dialogue, like that's what I'm gearing up for. So.
Right.
Looking over our notes, we haven't really discussed this yet, but looking over our quick notes, it kind of looks like we have a bit of a different viewpoint on how we attack this.
Right.
So do you want to go through yours and kind of we can discuss it?
Absolutely. Let me look at my notes because I forgot what I put. Just kidding. So I have a few different kinds of dialogue, and I'll go through them bit by bit and kind of get your thoughts on them as well. It's awful. I know it is. It really just is. So it kind of depends on the kind of story that I'm writing, the genre that I'm trying to write in, and also from the POV, if it's first person, third person, so on.
Sure.
Kind of can dramatically change my dialogue, which I'll get into in one of my points. So my standard basis for the types of dialogue that I try to write and try to stick to within a story is developmental dialogue. So for me, This is any kind of dialogue that is world building and is basically painting a picture of the character themselves. It's essentially me trying to as opposed to describing the person walking in the room, someone else describing them or something like that. Trying to take a little bit of the place of having to have too much narrative around things.
So you don't start every story with a character waking up and then going to their mirror and describing themselves?
Only every other book.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Because that'd be crazy. A lot of times this is I mix all these together within the story, and depends on, like I said, the viewpoint. Developmental dialogue is something that I try to use kind of sparingly.
Okay.
Just because I think it can become a little too heavy-handed and so on if you're just describing things constantly, and you don't want to treat the audience as stupid. But sometimes a little bit's needed. Do you remember when we went on vacation to blah, 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 blah? Oh, yeah, the beach was, and that way you can get some of that narrative out there through conversation versus a topic that's near and dear to our hearts that we'll be discussing, I think, next time.
We have a plan for next time?
Okay. So basically exposition. Um, I know we love talking
Oh,
about exposition. So it's
we did
basically,
discuss this. Yes,
yes,
I have the memory of a steel trap. Let me tell you.
I have a memory of a fly. So I use that a lot of times for exposition and so on. What are your thoughts on that?
I have no issue with it. It makes sense to me. I
Cool.
can also see, it's definitely a useful tool,
Yeah.
and I agree that you'd want to use it sparingly, but absolutely use it when it calls
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah. If you, it kind of throws a little bit of like a flavor into it
Hmm.
versus just A, B, C. If you have a character describe something or add basically exposition without it being exposition, um, it's helpful. My next is internal, and this is one of my favorites. And so this is when I'm writing, which is majority of my Gothic novellas. In fact, out of 8 of them, including the one I'm currently working on, 7, except for the one I'm currently working on, is written in first person.
Sure.
So I love having the main character, the protagonist, be the humble narrator. And so I view this as a form of dialogue, even though it's not being had between people, because what it usually does is take the place of a lot of the dialogue that you would need to put in there if you were writing in third person.
Yeah.
You can have that character, all their emotions, the way they react to people around them, describe people around them. You can tell the history of somebody, how they grew up together, all that stuff, without it being too heavy-handed because that's your viewpoint. So essentially, it actually cuts down on a lot of the dialogue, and it makes the dialogue that you do write really matter. If you're writing from that point of view, which is one of my favorite ways to write, just because it's fun.
Yeah. So,
Thoughts?
so no, this one was actually kind of brilliant. So when I saw this in your notes, um, I didn't really think of it as dialogue, right?
Right,
Because technically it's not.
right.
It's, but when I read it in your notes, and you just have like a one line note here about it, and I was like, duh,
Right.
right? I
Right.
already treat it like dialogue,
Yeah.
particularly in first person,
Yeah.
because I look at it as, the character is just having a conversation with the reader.
Yeah.
So it's constantly in and out of that.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I was just like, why wasn't I thinking of that as dialogue the whole time? Because I'm treating it like dialogue. So
Yeah.
brilliant. I love it.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you. All right. That's it. That's the show tonight. We're done. End on a high note. Before the next stupid shit that I say or something. All right. So the other kind of dialogue I use progression. This can be story progression through dialogue. Again, another form of exposition, but this is where you're laying out the plan, so to
Hmm.
speak. This is our plan of action. We're gonna take this ship and fly up to the thing, and but that's no bigger than a womp rat or whatever the case may be. And so, but you're progressing the story along. You're adding those plot points without having to be direct with it. And this is usually I find in a lot of books, this can be one of the most used forms of dialogue because it's progression, right? You're moving the
It
story
is.
along.
Yeah.
It really is kind of the whole point of dialogue is to move the story forward. Thoughts on
So on
that
this
one?
one, still totally agree. I think I'm going to agree with probably everything that you say. Um, this one is, I would also say it's probably the most used.
Yeah.
And I would also say that it's the one that shows the hand of the writer the easiest if you're not careful with it. So
Absolutely.
if it's not coming out, if the character wouldn't naturally say it, then
Right.
it becomes very obvious that the writer is speaking to the reader rather than a character speaking to another character.
Right.
But when used appropriately, it's probably the best way to just move that story forward.
Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't say the best. And there's I probably shouldn't even
It's
rank them, but it is a very effective way. How about that?
it's a really good way to move it forward. Again, it kind of depends on how you're writing it. So if you're writing it from like third person, this is the best way to move the story forward without it being too much like the writer being the narrator. and trying to explain everything to the audience.
Yeah.
We'll get into it later more so, but like again, the thing I see where people kind of screw this up would be like you have the idiot be the one that says, "Well, we'll just do this." Like unless that's like a tag or it's like supposed to be funny or ironic, like you said, would the character normally say this? If the guy who's just a complete moron like solves the problem
Yeah.
and not out of irony, but just cause that's the next guy to talk. It's stupid. Don't do that. That's my advice.
Very good.
So I have standard dialogue. This is for me not necessarily just trying to fill in time, but you can do a lot of character progression in this too. This is where you this is to me where you build like relationships. This is the snarky back and forth between the guy and the girl who don't like each other but are going to fall in love, or the friend who's going to betray him later and he says these little things like very passive aggressively or something. Doesn't necessarily have to progress the story forward, in my opinion, but builds the relationship so when inevitably somewhere in the story something happens, it leads back to these little moments, you know?
Hmm.
Gives good payoff to those. So, which actually ties in, it's almost the same as my next one, which is conflict. I love writing conflict dialogue. That's one of my favorite things to write.
Yeah.
It's just two characters pissed off at each other. The floor drops out from under them, and they're like, I can't. I just wrote a scene the other day that a character finds out another character has been lying to him, and it's so simple to write those because usually, like, if you look for like emotion and aggression with people, when we're very emotional, we don't tend to articulate super well.
Not at all.
So it kind of can just be a mess of words,
Hmm.
loud words, short sentences, back and forth. But it has such a cool pacing to it when you have conflict between characters. It can obviously move the story forward, but the reason I think it's a little bit different is because there's not always like a resolution to it or like basically like this is the direction they're going to go.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
just that's the moment they find out X and Y and they're pissed off at each other about it. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. And I guess my other thing when I'm writing dialogue is I like to focus on certain things about mannerisms within the character. It doesn't always have to be personality defects or whatever. It's like you know how ain't a proper word.
Right.
If your character's from the South, they can say ain't. That's okay. If they have an accent or they're from a certain dialect and there's certain slang terms or whatever, throwing that in there. I did that with Pollyanna and Eternum, where the girl he falls in love with is from uh, the small town in England, and she uses some just passive little terms in there that you might read as being like a typo, but that's like actually like
Sure.
locally like something they'd say.
Yeah.
Um,
Regional kind of.
yeah, dialect stuff.
Yeah.
So that's fun to play around with, as long as it's not like too crazy.
Yeah, you can definitely go overboard with that, but a
Just
little
start,
bit a little bit is a great way to like
yeah,
give some separation between your characters. Um,
just start writing all their dialogue in like German or something.
or you can also bring them together a little bit like that too. Like,
Yeah,
for instance, I had what was it 4 or 5 characters? I had a lot of characters in the last book, but 5 of them were from the same neighborhood, so I gave them some of the same slang, and they talked a little bit of the same way with that same voice, and
yeah, that's fun.
it
I,
is.
I like that stuff. It builds character, especially because it's like we hear their voices in our head, but the reader doesn't hear the same voice.
Yeah.
So a lot of times when I'm writing, I'm always thinking like, who would play this character if like Netflix picked it up, you know? And like that's just like a fun game I play, and so it's kind of interesting to try to put some of those characteristics in your dialogue just to make yourself happy. But I always wonder, like, when someone else reads it. We have a character in the Zenzia books named Growl, who's a pacifist big robot who's a cook, and he has a very, very British voice, almost like a Russell Brand kind of, that high pitched,
Right.
or like Monty Python-ish, kind of thing. And so I write a lot of his stuff where he says like mate and oi and stuff like that. I always
That's
wonder
cool.
when people read them if they hear that or if it's just kind of like my own thing,
I bet a lot of people do it if you're using words like that. Like those are
Yeah.
pretty clear tells. That was a pretty cool experience though when I worked with my narrator for the audiobook. Because I didn't really think too much about accents. I gave some of the characters some dialect type stuff in the language that they were using, but it's in the far future, different solar system. I didn't really think too much, like put accents on them.
Right.
And she started asking me questions like, "What do you want this character to be? What do you want this character to be?" I'm like, "Whatever the fuck you want, basically."
Right.
You know, I did my part. Now it's kind of up to you to like. So yeah, she just added English accents to the people that she thought like seemed like that, regular accents to some of the other characters, and then one of them, Lauren Gallagher. I think because of her last name, she's like, "I really want to give this character a Northern Irish accent. Can I do that?" I'm like, sure. I was like, okay, now everybody from Cadmus is like acts like they're from Northern Ireland. Cool.
Right. Right.
You know?
Was there any voices she put in there that like surprised you? Like you're like as it like when you heard it back, or she's like, I hear this person as being like having a British accent or something. Where you're like, really? Wow, I didn't even think that. Or did you kind of have it in your head a little bit where you're like, yeah, that makes sense.
They all just about all of them made sense to me like immediately. There was one that was a little off-putting to me at first. Like
Right.
I liked it. But like there's this character Tumbo. He's only in one scene. It's like a side character.
Right.
And I used a lot of that with him. Because I imagine him as like English or whatever the common language is, because I never actually specify. But whatever the common language is his second language.
Okay. Yeah.
So like when he says okay, when he's like, he says cocaine and
Cocaine.
and he speaks in like just broken English.
Right.
So for whatever reason, I guess I kind of imagine him as like West African or something like that,
Right.
which is a little bit odd because I wasn't really doing that with the other characters.
Right.
But she had a completely different kind of thing with him, and I was like, yeah, that's cool. It works.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's important for us to kind of not try to micromanage that sort of thing and
Right.
let go of our babies. Because if we were ever to get lucky and it does get picked up by
Right.
a studio and gets made into a film or a show, we're not going to have basically any control over it. So might as well get used to it now.
Yeah, no, I mean at that point, if as long as the check clears, I don't care who's playing who. You're like Idris Elba is playing every character, and I'd be like, great. As long as it's not Kevin James, I'm happy.
What do you have against Kevin James?
We're not getting into that in this episode, man. We're not getting into it.
We don't have that much time.
Awesome. Well, that's the kind of the short version of what
Cool.
how I do things in a tiny
Right. It's
subset.
pretty condensed.
Yeah, which I think is fine because I think this is something we can talk about. It's not going to be the last time we talk about dialogue on this podcast, unless one of us
I'm sure.
dies before the next episode.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. This is actually the second time we've talked about it. We talked about it a little bit in our bad advice episode, I believe.
Yeah, the first one, actually,
Yeah.
the one that, well, not now because this is all in the future, but the one that just came out.
Right.
Not to suspend everybody's belief, but we do not record this and release it the next day. So, like, if there's big world news, like the planet's been taken over by aliens or something, and we're just like dropping this, I can't believe they didn't talk about that. Yeah.
That reminds me of the episode of The Simpsons where Homer gets cast as the voice actor for some cartoon character.
I remember that. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
he's like, "Is this live?" And they're like, "No, it's not live. That's a terrible strain on the animator's wrist."
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, so good. Well, Wesley,
I-
tell me about you
yeah.
and your dialogue.
Oh, the dialogue, not just
Yeah,
about me.
not just about you. I
I
mean,
like long walks on the beach.
that's not true.
That's not true. No. All right. So I look at dialogue as a character's intent through their filter. And
Right.
what I mean by that is, what is the character trying to express? What do they want? What are they trying to get? Most of the time when I have some dialogue, they have some kind of goal or something like that. And I need to understand what that is and where they're coming from.
Right.
I try, there's probably a few examples where I don't follow this rule, but I try to basically follow the rule that if there isn't some real reason for them to be talking, if the characters aren't trying to get something, they probably shouldn't be having that conversation, or at least it shouldn't be on the page.
Right.
So you have that intent, and then you have to go through the filter of the character. So all the words that you're trying to express, what would that character actually use?
Yeah.
How would they express that? What would they say? And maybe more importantly, what would they not say?
Right.
You know, what kind of thing are they holding back? Because I find some of the most interesting dialogue is when characters are trying to hide something from the other character.
Yeah.
And you have that like push and pull and the little bit of subtext that kind of creates. So that's kind of like the base level. And then I have two real categories for it, which you've actually already covered this stuff. So I'm just going to kind of briefly talk about how I look at it. But it's basically everything that you just talked about. Just I think of it in like two buckets. So conflict or exposition.
Yep.
So exposition covers all the stuff you talked about: character building, world building, moving the plot forward, all of that stuff. Conflict is it's conflict. I would mention here though that a disagreement or different viewpoints about something, that doesn't actually count as conflict.
Right.
Like as an example for the audience, like let's say you like Chipotle and I don't.
Right.
We have a difference of opinion. And maybe we're driving down the road and we're talking about that. But it's not a conflict until we're like, hey, I'm hungry. And then you pull into the Chipotle parking lot.
Right.
Then it's a conflict, right?
Right. Then it's murder.
Just for record, that is not true either, though. I ate Chipotle just a little while ago.
I like Qdoba more.
We don't have Qdoba here anymore.
Oh, do you not?
Here, at all, yeah. So I haven't had Qdoba in a long time.
It's about the same. Sorry.
We also don't have we don't have Tokyo Joe's here either, dude.
Really?
Yeah, I was really bummed about that when we moved here.
Is there anything you do have? In case anybody doesn't know this, we live in separate states.
But we used to live in the same state.
Yeah, that's...
Anything like we have here that you don't have?
Yeah.
I think there's a few, but not really the ones that I go to. Because,
Gotcha.
you know, celiacs and stuff, so
Yeah.
I'm kind of limited.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough.
All right.
Sorry. Conflict. That was the opposite of conflict. That was just two people talking about food.
We got off track.
It's okay. We're leaving it in. It's what the people
so
pay
we've got,
for.
Wait, you're getting paid? Shit. No, we've got conflict and exposition, and if you like put them as like a Venn diagram, the best dialogue is when they overlap. And you're able to reveal character or world building or all of that stuff, or something like that, while having that tension and push and pull of conflict. That's the best stuff.
Absolutely.
And then lastly, I feel like stakes, having something at something to lose in the conversation is very important. Almost necessary. Like there's probably a few exceptions out there where it's not really absolutely necessary. But stakes are, if you don't have some stakes, something to lose in the conversation, something, some problem that can be solved or made worse in the conversation, I guess I'd have to ask, does it need to even be there?
Right.
But if you have that intent of the characters already set up, you're probably already have the stakes there, and you don't have to really worry about it much.
Right. Right. And again, that doesn't have to be like world-ending stakes.
No, it can be very small.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say just like little payoffs to something a character said, like in chapter 1, and then in chapter 13, there's like a callback to that.
Yeah,
And it can be kind of like almost like a throwaway line, but it completes like a very, very small arc. Like maybe in chapter 1, character A really misses going to Tokyo Joe's and mentions it. And in chapter 13, he gets to go and eat Tokyo Joe's and just mentioned it offhand. There you go. See, it's a big story.
Chapter
arc.
15, the other character ships him some Tokyo Joe's.
Right.
Actually, don't do that. Don't do that.
So soggy.
So, do you have any thing you want to add or disagree with me on kind of my perspective there?
No. I'm excited to get into the next batch of things that we're going to get into here, but I feel pretty strongly that, at least on the surface, taking out any stylized approaches, that we tend to agree on all this stuff.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, no,
it's just slightly different ways to look at it, and
absolutely.
I bet if we talked to 20 different authors, we'd probably get 15 different ways of looking at it.
Yeah, and my guess is if they're even remotely good at all, I'm talking about myself. I'm not good. I'm remotely good. They would probably in their own way agree with all of these and say, yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
You're going to find very few authors out there who are going to hear that list and say, that's not how you do it at all. So
we could have some disagreements about the next sections.
Well, conflict.
But yeah, if you're listening and you do disagree with anything, please let us know in the comments. Email us, whatever, spark a conversation.
Stalk us.
Yeah, internet stalk us. That's always fun.
Wait outside our house with a boombox. I don't know.
Oh, say anything.
Hey, okay. Say anything. Dialogue. Sorry. Okay, go on. I'm running on fumes today.
Wow. Okay. So our next section is some things to look out for that might be problematic in your dialogue, or might be kind of weighing it down, making it worse than it necessarily would have to be.
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of go back and forth on this, or?
Yeah. Why don't you take the first one?
Okay.
And I'll take the second one. Yeah, actually,
that's usually how it works when you go back and forth.
Right. Thanks for pointing that out. Okay.
Yeah. Oh God, the COVID cough. All right. So the first one is like interchangeable dialogue.
Right.
So if you can mix and match the characters that are saying those lines without changing the lines or anything like that, there's a very good chance that your dialogue needs to be improved.
Yeah.
The scene should be falling apart if you change who's saying what, because not just do they sound different or use different words, but back to their intent. The intent must not be there if you can change those around.
Right. Absolutely. No,
so,
I think I've had scenes that I've been writing where it's like a call and response and two characters going back and forth, and I've made that mistake of kind of mixing the characters around or like messing up, and some of it's actually been like a typo where I'm like said so and so,
Sure.
and I read it and I go, whoa, wait, what? Like, why would they say that? Kind of thing. It's also kind of fun. Happy mistakes if you have like four people like having a conversation, five, six people all having a conversation at once, um, and trying to figure out who would say what because you have all your bullet
Yeah.
points to get to your end. Okay, who would have this idea? Who would have the bad idea? Who would make this joke? Who would do this? And you can, it's kind of like trying on a pair of socks, right? You can try a bunch of different things. Um, but at the end of the day, it usually goes with my first instinct. But yeah, if you're having two characters talk back and forth and it's just either of them could say whatever, I mean,
Yeah.
I guess unless they're like identical twins. Is that an exception to the rule?
I guess it could be. That's an interesting idea.
No, that's a dumb idea. Come on, we can both just. I just thought the Weasley
Well,
brothers
here-
from Harry Potter.
Like, do they have the same intent, or do they have the same goals as well?
Most of the time. Until
Well,
one
then,
of them
yeah,
died.
actually, it probably wouldn't matter in that case. That might be an exception. I actually had one that I fucked up recently, where I was writing in the next book. There's a scene where there's a squadron of fighter pilots going up against a battleship, and I had all these characters bantering, and you don't know most of these characters. You don't know any of these characters yet, really, because it's supposed to be the prologue.
Right.
And I was really having a hard time balancing that, and I still don't think I have it right. I think I need to rewrite it. But there's like 16 people in the squadron. I thought that it seemed unrealistic if only 2 or 3 of them are talking, right?
Right.
So I've got like 5, 6, maybe 7 characters back and forth a little bit.
Yeah.
And absolutely, I could have just, the first go through, I could have absolutely just switched any of them and it wouldn't have fucking mattered. Which was kind of that tell that, okay, this scene needs to be reworked heavily.
Right.
And maybe even reconsidered. Maybe, maybe I need to do something different with it entirely. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, it comes down to like the Star Wars battle fights, like in space fights. Red 7 checking in, Red 9 checking in.
Yeah.
You have all these characters; they all check in. But most of the dialogue is between like 2 of them. Any given time, you have Luke Skywalker, obviously, and then Han Solo, and then he has his
Wedge.
one... Yeah.
And I can't believe they named the fat one Porkins.
But like they make them all known, so it has this grandiose feel to it. But then they shrink it back down to only a few characters, or only the ones that are actually interacting.
I'll also say that I think you can get away with that a little bit more in a film because you also have the visual aspect of it.
Right.
And people don't necessarily need to pay as much attention because it's like all they really need to know is shit's blowing up.
Right.
So.
Well, and their voices are actually different from each other.
Yeah, that helps. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have all these different cues. So
yeah, in the book, it gets tricky.
You don't have all those tools.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Do you want to go through the next one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the next one, and I kind of know a little bit something about this, is speeches are long chunks of uninterrupted dialogue should be scrutinized. Sometimes they're okay. Oftentimes something else is needed. So I love writing really, really long dialogue, maybe once a book.
Okay.
It's fun to like have like a character go on a whole rant,
Yeah.
and they're like I love like the call and response of like, well, what's going on? And the character just unloads like this long exposition to the point where they're like out of breath or something. And it's just, it's like almost in a comical sense.
Yeah.
But God, you should use it sparingly. I mean, because you run into like the villain who's just like,
the villain is often the one that does that. Yep.
You caught me monologuing again. But like even then, like, oh my gosh, you have to scrutinize it so much because like it's easy to go through. Most dialogue in general that I write is about a sentence, two sentences at a time, back and
Yeah.
forth. I like quick back and forth. I like someone to say like hi, hello, like because that's how
Right.
people kind of talk. I don't feel you need to have like long drawn out dialogue all the time. If you're trying to get to somewhere, it can just be like step, 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 step to get there.
That's usually the
Um,
better way to do it.
yeah, because it keeps people interested. Um,
Yeah.
but once in a while, I like to do it. But every single time I've ever written something like that, and again, I love writing it because it's kind of fun. It is such a challenge because I have to end up rewriting that thing and moving sentences around and adding,
Yeah.
you almost have to add breaks in there for the character to breathe. You, you
Yep.
know, and it's like it's so unnatural unless you're on a podcast to talk for that long uninterrupted. um, but yeah, no, I think it's right. I think you're absolutely right. If you're gonna use it, it's fine. But like, whereas you might do a revision on dialogue, like one or two passes,
Yeah.
I feel like you gotta do like four or five passes on like a really long, drawn out bit of dialogue. Um, just
It is
again
more
and again
challenging.
reading it. It
Yeah.
is.
And it's hard to actually make it sound natural.
Right. It almost doesn't work as natural. You almost have to use it. Like I said, it has to be
Yeah.
either like a punchline or like a big reveal or something. Like it has to have a reason for being that long, not just because you're like, this character's going to say all this. Like it has to be like, character runs in out of breath, is like, they're like, what's wrong? He's like, da, 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 and goes on this long thing. That has to be the reason why he does it in like a comical sense, or like there's a sense of rushing or something. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Otherwise, if you're just writing characters like that, like unless that's part of their character trait, I don't know. Maybe there's like a character who just talks in long-winded sentences.
I actually have one of those.
Do you?
Yeah. So um, Admiral Davis in this book here, he's like the proper admiral that
Right.
he's actually a spy master. He's like of the intelligence division, and he knows the plan. He's the mastermind behind the plan, and he's doling out information as the characters need it.
Yeah.
So it was actually the natural way to give this information is in these big dialogue dumps.
Right. Right.
It was the only way it seemed natural.
Right.
That didn't make it easier to write
Right.
in an interesting way.
Right.
And I think a lot of my dialogue in that book is pretty good. That hopefully it's still good. I'm not as confident that that's as good. It might just be like,
Right.
okay, we're getting through this. I don't know.
So you're saying that like not every time he goes through that is it like the Independence Day speech given by Bill Pullman?
No, they're not. It's actually more like The Matrix did this actually. So especially the first one.
Okay.
I guess they all did it actually, but the first one really like after Neo is freed from the Matrix, he has several consecutive scenes where it's basically just him asking questions, single sentence questions.
Yeah.
And Morpheus going on long ass
Right.
exposition dumps. And it actually works okay.
Oh, it does.
Right?
It does. In the first movie, it works okay.
Yeah, it's
better than the others, but
right. And I've actually read that script as well.
yeah.
And it works in the script.
Yeah.
In fact, the script is kind of cool because it actually has some like extended scenes and stuff that didn't make it in the movie. But
Really?
yeah.
Okay.
But really, the way the Wachowskis, like, they described those scenes so well in like very, very few words, like very concisely. They described some very complex scenes that they were going to be doing with the film.
Yeah.
It's a good script to read.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
The next one. Oh, that's me, right? Yeah, that's how it works. We discussed this. The next one is small talk. That's all we got. Small talk.
Yeah.
I think this one's pretty simple. It goes almost without saying, but you should avoid it whenever possible. If you have to do it because that's what the characters would naturally be doing, it makes sense, but keep it as short as possible.
I would say it's like the Reservoir Dogs rule for me.
How do you mean? That's interesting.
So like the beginning of Reservoir Dogs, they're all sitting around the diner and they're talking about like tipping and all that stuff.
I love that scene.
Love this. It's a great scene, right? That is small talk in a weird way. They're just sitting there drinking. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that scene has no real purpose.
No, within the movie, except if you after you've watched the movie, if you rewatch that scene, it gives you so much internal character development with each character that's talking through that small talk, right? So you can kind of figure out, like, who Mr. Pink is, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I would say this: if you're doing small talk, have there be a reason for it, not necessarily what they're saying, but like I found it's kind of like if you have like romantic interest, right, and they're having small talk, they're gonna just shoot the shit about whatever, right? But their general character traits of who they are as people, and maybe red flags or green flags or whatever, should kind of come through that conversation. Like, it should have a purpose there, which should be at least character growth. If you just have two dudes talking about, I don't know, what they did for summer jobs when they're 15, right. I mean, if they're both like, I worked at McDonald's, and the other one's like, I did too, and that's it, like, I don't know, like, it doesn't feel like it gives you any growth. I guess the argument could be made that it makes your characters real, but it also makes them really boring.
Yeah.
In a way, you know what I mean? Like, there's other ways to do it.
When I was thinking small talk, I guess you're right. Some of those other things are definitely small talk, and I didn't really consider that. So thank you for that. What I was thinking of, I guess, when I originally thought of it was like, hi, how are you? My name is, what's your name? Like, right. Introductions and that first like awkward bit.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. Some of that other stuff is small talk. I would disagree or push back a little bit on the romantic one that you mentioned. I don't know that would, I guess you would consider it like small talk, but there's like that subtext under there.
Right.
Of like,
right.
You're kind of testing this person. You're
right.
seeing their reactions, seeing if they might be,
Yeah. I think that's what I mean more so. Like, I think I do a lot of the like hero's journey thing, where characters going and meeting person A, person B, person C, person D kind of thing. They're going on that journey where they're meeting all these different. And so, of course, you're going to have introductions, right? I walked into this beautiful field and there was this creature and blah, 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 blah. Usually, though, even if it is very hi, hello, so on and so forth, I like to write it so that there's character development behind it. The tone, the pauses, the I'm shocked to see this, or whatever the case may be. I think if you just write it like, I guess if you write it the way you would react if you just met someone, at a bar or something, it's just not entertaining.
No.
And it only means something to you when you introduce yourself to someone because you are that person. You're not the person in the story. So as the reader, that interaction has to mean something. So I think it's just about subtext.
I don't even care about that introduction when it's me. But no, I agree with everything you said there. The only thing that I would add is that if you can write small talk like Quentin Tarantino, then none of these rules apply, because
Well, and that's the exception to the rule, right? I mean, realistically, it is so hard to write dialogue about essentially nothing that is that
Yeah,
captivating. That if you're able to do that, then I don't know. Like, why are you listening to us? I mean,
right. I've
Christ Almighty.
I
Just
mean,
saying.
he's pretty much top of the pile for that. So I
Yeah.
mean, I
Whether whether you love him, hate him, love all of his movies, love some of his movies, um, there's sometimes I do not want to watch a Quentin Tarantino movie more than once
no,
because of how dialogue heavy it is or because of subject matter. But it's like seeing a painting that's gorgeous and you know it's gorgeous and you know the work that went into it, but you don't want to hang it in your living room. That's how I feel about some of Quentin Tarantino stuff. Like I don't want to watch that movie again and again and again. But on that first watch, I'm just like, I have to respect the hell out of it
oh
because,
yeah.
like, who writes like that? You know?
There's actually several of his movies that I don't like.
Yeah.
But even in the ones that I don't like, the dialogue is still fantastic.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
So our last one,
Our last one is well, as you know, no, that's the last one. As you know, dialogue. Basically, telling each other what they already know for the audience's benefit.
yeah,
Um,
this is the best dialogue.
God,
It's the best way to get your plot moving
you,
forward and
you know
get that
what's
exposition
you know
across.
what's stupid is like I mean, God, you see it all the time in movies. They still do that, like in every
Yeah,
show, every film you watch, even the good ones. I feel like they do this. There's no reason to do this in the book. You have at most a first or third person uh, point of view narration going on. The characters know what's going on at this point. If you have to constantly repeat things back, like unless it's like a call and response, like you're trying to delve in the point and like I don't know. I'm sure there's some instances where you could get away with this. But in general it's just dumb.
it's lazy writing. I think there's maybe one acceptable exception for as you know dialogue, and it's actually not the realm that we normally even talk about. Plays.
Ah, yes.
So if you're writing a play, you're going to have some huge, strict limitations with your set, with your actors, all of that. So that might be one of the few times where you can get away with two characters walking on stage, having a really unnatural conversation just for the audience's benefit, just to
Right.
move on.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. I was thinking about that too with which we'll get into when you were kind of talking about when you write dialogue through that lens where you want it to be through the character's lens, not
Yeah.
interchangeable. And I was kind of thinking about plays as being in a weird way kind of an exception to that with like some of Shakespeare's stuff or something like that, right? Where it really is his voice throughout the entire thing, even if character A, B, and C are having a conversation. It's very
Yeah.
I don't know. It's very interchangeable in a weird way. But no, plays that is a weird medium. That
It
yeah.
is.
No, it's a good call. I mean, I think writing exposition is hard enough as it is. So much so that we're gonna have to have a whole episode on it. um, but writing dialogue that serves the purpose of just rehashing something that you've already talked about or the audience already knows, it starts to feel like you're just trying to fill the page. You're just trying to up your word count, or you just don't know what to have those two characters talk about.
Yeah.
Uh, and
And
it
that
just,
might be okay for a first draft, get it
yeah.
out, but
Or,
fix it.
maybe age level is a thing too. I mean, maybe you want to rehash some finer plot points if you're doing like a young reader's novel or something like that.
Sure.
I could see that maybe, but if you're writing something like for readers, for adults, I just
I,
don't.
I still
I
think
and I'm
even
Yeah,
if you need to rehash something, I still think there's probably a better way to do it.
there is. And I'm sure I'm guilty of this at some point. I'm sure there's some point where I've done this and I
Oh yeah.
didn't even realize
Oh,
it.
I definitely have.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But it's something that if it does present itself to me, I always try to get rid of it as quickly as humanly possible. It's like one of the first things to like hit the cutting room floor is where in editing, and my brother will point this out to me. He's like, you say the same shit 3 times in 2 pages, just because you don't trust your audience to hear you the first time you say it. You say it,
Right.
then these two characters talk about it, and then 3 pages later they talk about it again, and I'm like, oh yeah, huh? Yeah, that's kind of dumb, but so I guess now we're gonna go through some tips on improving
Yeah.
dialogue.
We've got a few here. Maybe we'll think of some as we go too.
Yeah,
And also, if you're listening and you've got some tips of your own and you want us to know about them, I'm always wanting to learn more about this subject.
all right. So first off, on tips on improving dialogue, I can start this one
Yeah,
if you want.
I'd like that.
Read great dialogue. Scripts are great because the dialogue has to stand on its own. Reading prose fiction with strong dialogue can help you learn how to weave the internal and external together. This is one place where watching a film or listening to an audiobook isn't good enough because weak dialogue can be elevated by a great performance.
Were you reading that?
Yeah, I was reading. I was sorry reading. It was yours word for word.
I know.
Um,
I'm actually looking at it right now too. Those were just notes. I didn't actually expect either of us to read it off, but that's cool.
it was good. It was good. It felt like there was a lot of information in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So about scripts, I've talked about those many times, but I think that's one of the best places to start. Because it absolutely has to stand on its own. There's nothing around it. It's just the character's name and then their dialogue.
Yeah.
And the great thing about scripts is once the movie is made, they just release them. They're out there on the internet. You're not pirating. You can just go download them for free, legally. And most of them are quick reads. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Oh
I
yeah.
absolutely recommend people doing that. It doesn't get you everything though. It doesn't tell you how to really do dialogue in a novel, but it gets you like the meat and potatoes there.
It's funny. I actually had started out like I did music for a long time, obviously, and then my next thought when I had failed at music, no, I'm just kidding. When I stopped wanting to really do a lot of music, my next thought actually was to maybe go into like doing like short films or something,
Yeah.
or like writing scripts. And so I actually I took a little bit of a stab at it, and that's kind of more where I started and had like a few things I'd started and never went
Oh,
anywhere.
nice.
Just because they weren't, it wasn't my thing, but it did teach me a lot about formatting for dialogue and reading examples of that, and like you said, downloading different scripts from various movies I really like and kind of dissecting how they would write dialogue and stuff like that is yeah, it's a really cool thing. I mean, I always suggest, like, for me it's a lot of times like when I'm writing, it's TV shows or something.
Mhm.
Like I love like just binge watched for like the fourth time like all of Stranger Things when I was sick. Um
Yeah.
like the whole thing. And the dialogue's so good in that freaking show. And it's so well written that it's hard not to binge watch like a show and then go back to writing and not feel inspired to write good dialogue, because you know that the beats, and
Yeah.
once you take it from that someone's actually going to be saying it, someone's actually going to be inflecting upon the things. And if you write dialogue like that, because most people who are reading your book, they're reading it and they're playing it out in their head sort of as a film anyway, so why not give them those beats to play off of anyway,
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we could actually just go ahead and recommend a few to people if you want. So
Sure.
you got Stranger Things.
Yeah.
I would throw out for TV shows with great dialogue. Fleabag, written
Hmm.
by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, I believe it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a really good script. I haven't read it in a while, but it was adapted to the show very, very well.
Yeah.
We already mentioned Matrix. That one, the
Yeah.
first Matrix, solid. And then for books, books are a little bit harder to like recommend for strong dialogue. It's always easier to go to film and scripts and stuff because like there's not as many out there. Well, there's tons of scripts out there, but there's not as many
Right.
like that were made into films. And people's taste for books vary a lot more.
Yeah.
But if I was going to recommend some, Elmore Leonard, crime writer and Western writer, fantastic dialogue. And let's give this guy some props because we've given him some shit over the plots and stuff. But Stephen King, holy shit, his dialogue is good.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. I recommend like one of the ones that I really like because it's so simple is The Little Prince. It's just one of my all-time favorite books. It's like the book that got me into reading.
I think I have that back here somewhere, but I don't think I've actually read it.
It's really really simple, incredibly simple. The dialogue is, but it just has this feel to it that's just really neat. I don't know. It progresses the plot forward, but it's very simple. It is very much kind of like the small talk feel to it, like
Okay.
"Hello, how are you?" kind of thing. But the way it's done is done so perfectly and at times heartbreaking that it just it's just so good. It's just such a great book for any age.
Okay.
It's like my favorite book.
Is
It's
it?
just a good book. It's just a great book.
I'll have to read it sometime. I think it's fairly short too, right? I
It
think
is.
it's like a middle grade type book, like The
Yeah,
Giver or something.
it's like it's a novella. It's in that
Okay.
short of a range, um, and it is definitely written so that any age can read it. Subject matter wise, like on the surface, it seems really bright and colorful, but the underlying tone of it is very very dark. So it's
Well, fuck. So is the one that I just mentioned, The Giver.
right.
Like,
Yeah.
so the next one is like if you need to add spice or interest to a chunk of dialogue, you can include choreography, the environment, props. All of these things you can kind of bring into the picture to work with. You can use them to add like interest, subtext, symbolism, tension. All of these things they can be utilized for. Probably don't try to do all of them in the same
Right.
scene, but this is one way that you can actually like break up those that we're talking about the long chunks. You can use choreography for that. Do a chunk of the dialogue. The character walks over here and does something, and then continues talking.
Yeah.
And if that thing is interesting or somehow symbolic of something else or whatever, great.
I think it adds menace to situations too.
Yeah.
Like I love when like maybe the reveal is happening or something, and the character is like pouring himself a drink or lighting a cigar, and then they walk around the room and that just if you give the character something to do besides just standing there
Right. So it's not just
talking,
talking heads.
right? Yeah, that can definitely. I love I love bringing weather into it. Is one of my favorite things to do. Like it's like a really hot room or something, so they're like
Yeah.
fanning themselves and sweating profusely while they're talking or whatever the case may be. Just bringing things into the conversation like that, I find really fun.
Yeah.
If you can bring that into the dialogue, and it also pads your dialogue quite a bit. Especially like you find that it's kind of funny. You find that most conversations with people, if they're trying to like get a certain point across, are very short. Like most conversations can be
Yeah.
broken down to like 8 back and forths, and that's it.
Hey, give me your money.
Right. So having the characters do things within the scene pads that out.
Yeah.
And
Or just having things happen around them.
yeah, absolutely.
Like I've used this kind of stuff all the time since my stuff is pretty dialogue heavy. Like I have to utilize this stuff, otherwise it's just people talking to each other.
Right.
So like, they're talking and a repulsor car, like a hover car, flies overhead and throws her hair over.
Right.
It's just a quick beat in between like things happening.
Yeah.
I remember using in one scene for some symbolism. Gabby is meeting the admiral for the first time, and he's being brought, or he brings her into the dean of the military academy she's in. Like he basically confiscates this guy's office to bring her in, and he's about to basically tell her that he caught her doing this plan. I'm not going to get into that, but basically she's about to get fucking caught.
Right.
And there's like these floor to ceiling windows overlooking a scenic valley, and he starts asking her questions, and she looks over and there's a hawk circling looking for food. Not the most subtle symbolism.
Right. But still.
But I wanted to put it in there.
Yeah. It builds the tension. It builds the tension. I think it's a really cool tool to use, especially if you're trying to have a really tense scene. Because otherwise the reveal is just talking heads, like you were saying.
Yeah.
It's not as impactful. And, sometimes the most quote unquote cliche of symbolism or whatever can really just open up a scene. Like sometimes there's a reason why this idea is quote unquote cliche or overused. It's because it's a really good idea. And sometimes I found myself doing that too, where I'm like, it's not the most subtle of things, but I'm like, there's a reason for that. It's because it works really, really well,
I am a little bit overseeing the quick shot. I don't think I've actually seen this in a book, but I've seen it in films and TV where somebody's about to like tattle, and there's a quick shot of a rat.
Yeah.
You're like, hey, come on, guys, let's.
It's The Departed.
Well, they did it. They did it in The Expanse too.
Yeah.
I guess that's why I was thinking because I'm rewatching that.
Yeah.
And I've read the first two books. I don't recall that being in the book, but maybe it is. I should read the rest of that series, though.
How do you even write that in the book? We look over and there's a rat. Like, I don't know. It's like, yeah. That'd be a subtle way to write it.
In The Expanse, at least it made more sense.
Right.
Because they're on like a really crappy ship.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Anyway, let's move on.
All right.
Do you have anything to add to that one?
No, not at all. I think it's awesome. So I like this one. Utilize countdowns to add tension.
Yeah,
that's fun. I've done that a few times. It's the ticking clock, right? It's we only have 5 minutes to do this. We only have, I think giving. Even if it's just kind of like not necessarily throwaway line, but if it's like, hey, we have to get in and out of here in 20 minutes, otherwise the building's going to explode. And then you mention it that one time and maybe one other time with a count. And like, it's still in the reader's head. They're like counting it down, I think anytime there's a clock that's fading away by the second, it builds so much tension because it feels like it brings it into a race, right? Like at that point, it is a race against time. So, yeah.
And when I think of this, I actually usually think of it. I know we're talking about dialogue, but I usually think of it like between dialogue.
Right.
So a couple of characters they get in an elevator, and the guy's maybe going to try to hit on the girl or whatever.
Right.
They're at the 5th floor.
Yeah. And
he thinks of something to say finally, and that they're at the 4th floor. She doesn't say anything as they pass the 3rd floor. It gets the 2nd floor.
Yeah.
He's watching this countdown and knowing that this is his timetable to get her number or whatever. Or, people having a conversation while they're loading, they're moving or something. They're loading their bags into the car. or going to the airport or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
There's only so much time.
Yeah, you have that visual cue that this conversation is going to end, and whatever the hell this character is trying to get out of the other character, they've got a finite amount of time to do it.
Yeah.
And, it's the clock's ticking, just like you said.
Absolutely. No, that's a great tool to have in your kit for sure. I don't really have much to add to that. I mean, that's kind of self-evident. It's just
it should make sense to everybody that hears it.
If you know basic math.
Right. And I mean, this is a way to add tension outside of dialogue or in all kinds of scenes. Like almost any time that you can add some kind of ticking clock to a situation.
If there's an expiration date on two characters interacting of any kind, it doesn't have to be minutes, seconds. It could be, months.
Yeah.
It could be, I'm dying of cancer.
Yeah.
This long. There's the ultimate count. You could base a whole book off that countdown. And there's your tension. Every page is a little bit closer to an inevitable end,
Sounds like a cheery book.
It's my next one. No, I'm just kidding. Now it is.
So this next one, I don't really want to take credit for it because I'm sure somebody else has done this. But as far as I know, I am the only one that's talked about this specifically.
Yeah.
And I know this is a technique that I found myself doing because I was having trouble getting some of the dialogue to work between a side character. So if you have a character, say you have two characters talking and you know one of them pretty well, so you know what they're going to say, you know how they're going to react, and you can write that character fine. The other character you're having trouble with, maybe they're a very different type of person than you. They don't think like you, whatever.
Yeah.
You can actually turn that scene around, rewrite the entire thing from their point of view, preferably in first person, but you could probably do this in third person just fine too.
Yeah.
But you write it from their point of view with their internal thoughts, and then the dialogue should start flowing for you, or at least hopefully it should. You might get an interesting flow out of it. You might, find some things that you wouldn't have thought of any other way.
Yeah.
You can also do this with unreliable narrator as well. So if you do them both, if you do the scene from both characters' perspective with the unreliable narrator, you might start thinking about, okay, this character said one thing. Maybe the other character actually heard something different.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily mean misheard, although that could work. There's that awesome scene in Firefly where the doctor's like, "Are you Alliance?" And I think it's Worley. I think that's the bounty hunter's name. He's like, "I've never thought of myself as a lion. I do have a mighty roar."
Yeah.
But that's actually not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about you see this all the time when people remember things, they remember them wrong.
Right.
Or two people have a conversation, and anybody out there who's been a supervisor or managed people or mediated any kind of conflict will know they have very different views of what just happened.
Yep.
So you could actually write that scene with one character saying one thing, and then the dialogue from when you write the scene with the other character, the dialogue is a little bit different. Probably not completely different, but a little bit skewed.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit meaner or whatever. They might be placing their intentions on it. Now, this is a lot of extra work. And you're not going to probably use that necessarily in the scene, but when you put them together, you probably have a more realistic version of than you would have otherwise. And maybe the juice is worth the squeeze. At least. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I think I've done some stuff like this as just a general exercise.
Yeah.
Nothing that I've left in. But I have done this a few times on projects where I'll take a scene and just try to rewrite the scene, even if it's just an outline, from the other character's perspective to make what they're saying make more sense. Especially if you're writing in first person narrative, Everything's
Yeah.
from your main character's point of view, right? So if you bring a secondary character into it, you're trying to see things from their point of view, which is really tricky to do on that first person narrative. So a lot of times I'll go back and redo the scene just as an outline to say, okay, they would maybe see this kind of reaction or this sentence
Sure.
as aggressive, or they think this character is actually lying, even though as the narrator, we know that character is telling the truth. They really did see a ghost on the third floor, but they just seem crazy, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think it's a
Well,
really
that's awesome.
cool tool. Yeah, no, I'm when I saw it on your list, I was kind of surprised because I kind of thought I was the only one that like kind of thought about things that way too. So so apparently everybody does it, and
Fuck,
we're
I
not
thought it
so
was
special,
special.
right?
Damn.
So one thing I wanted to add in here is a tip and trick for writing dialogue for newer authors.
Oh,
And
perfect.
I didn't put this in there because most of the stuff that we're talking about is obviously not necessarily advanced, but I mean you've probably been writing for a minute. One thing when I first started writing dialogue in the format for a book is trying to figure out how to end dialogue, where it would be like, asked so and so, replied so and so, said so and those chunks. And I had a really good piece of advice from my buddy Seth, who he's the one that's like knows all the nuts and bolts of the writing process.
Sure.
He said, when in doubt, and when you're not sure what character is saying what, like it's a big, long, drawn out scene, and like once in a while you want to say, this person said this, just put said or asked, and that's
Yeah.
it. Like, don't overthink it, because a lot of people they think that if they keep saying the word said, it comes across as lazy or repetitive. But what the human mind does when you read this, and I've seen this in a lot of books, is you stop even reading that word.
Yep.
Period. So don't be afraid to use that as your word. Because I was trying to use like every word but said. Like I was like exclaimed.
Right.
And not that there's not room to do that sometimes. Like you can do that. It is fun to do that and whatever. But I was trying so hard not to just be like said. And he was just like, no, just lean into it. No one's going to care. Like that becomes a filler word that you don't even read after a while.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. I just, guess I didn't even really think that was going to be, I don't know. I guess that I take that for granted these days.
Right.
But if you go back far enough, we're talking actually before I was really writing seriously. So this is a long time. But for a while it was taught, like creative writing classes, were taught often with said is dead.
Really?
And they said, don't use said. And that was
Really?
just that was for a little while. That was the
Huh.
fashion, I guess you'd say.
Yeah.
At least for teaching.
Yeah.
I don't think that the public really had an appetite for that because it's annoying.
It
when
is.
you read a book where everything is exclaimed or
Proposed.
yeah, all these fancy ones, all these fancy dialogue tags, it's exhausting and it pulls you out of the rhythm of the actual dialogue.
Yeah.
So it's counterproductive. Once in a while, like I said, it can actually add a little bit of punch.
Yeah.
When you use it sparingly, but
Yeah, and again, I'm not saying you can't use it. It just is it has to feel natural when you use it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's if you're doing exclaimed, the dog wants to be on camera apparently.
oh, we'll be on camera.
Hey, come here. Oh, you're a good girl. You're a good girl. Yes. Lordy.
I don't know if I have any cats near me. Well, I have one cat near me.
Yeah, but no, I totally agree. Like like you can use it, but it has to write itself.
Yeah.
If you when in doubt, just throw said or asked. Because if you end it with a question mark, that is a pet peeve that I have. If people say said after a question mark, that is one of the things that I like give other writers crap for. I'm like asked. They're asking a question.
Oh, what's the guy's name? Oh my god, I
Tom.
don't remember his name, but he actually runs like one of the largest YouTube like writing channels out there. I can't I'm embarrassed that I can't think of his name, but he actually um he counted them for like he he took like a survey of like 5 chapters or something from like 10 really famous authors
Yeah.
and counted and like got a percentage down of like what the percentage of said and asked were versus what their percentage of like the more fancy ones.
Right.
And for most of them, like including Stephen King, Brandon Sanderson, and stuff like that, they were like in the 70 to 80% mark of said and
Said.
asked.
Yep. Yep.
Which that to me that seems about right. Like
Yeah. No, that's exactly it. You can put said as they did this or with this kind of, like
yeah,
said, comma, blah, 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 whatever. Um, but yeah, if it becomes a word that you just, it's basically just like plot points for people to know who's talking, if
yep,
especially if you're having a quick back and forth, because sometimes even though we try to write our characters as this is what they would say, if characters are replying with 2 or 3 words to each other, it's sometimes
yeah,
that's tricky to do, right? Like these quick back and
it
forth, they're
is.
being quippy. So
And
that's
if you
where
have
you
more than
really
two
need it.
characters,
Yeah.
and if you have more than 2 characters, it gets even harder. But you can
Yeah.
also use some of the other techniques that we've already discussed, like the action beats that were just like in the
Yeah.
choreography. So like you could say this person picked up this thing, and then if you write their dialogue in that same paragraph, it's clear that that's the character speaking.
Right.
And then you can kind of just get rid of some of the dialogue tags.
Yeah.
But you don't want to overuse that either.
Right. Yeah. Or another one that I like to use is versus tags or any of that. You can actually throw the character's name into the dialogue. If they're talking to Sarah, they could be like, "Sarah, listen, I just da 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 da." Um, it's okay because like in general, people will use each other's name if they're having a conversation with each other in real life, and it's okay to do that from time to time too. If you don't want to just said so and so, said so
Right.
and so, said so and so. I depending on who's talking and what the circumstances are, like when in doubt, you just throw the other character's name in there, and you're just like, oh well, they're the one, they're addressing this person, so it's obviously that person. So it's all these subtle little tricks that you can use. I think to you're not trying to fool the audience necessarily, but you're kind
You're
of
giving clues.
yeah, you're giving clues so that they don't really have to think about who's talking. They just know
Yeah.
who's talking, and it just flows freely,
Yeah.
as dialogue should.
As dialogue should. I would caution, because I think you're absolutely right about putting characters' names in there. I mean, I do it occasionally when it seems like the character would actually say that naturally.
Right. Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that I would, if we were giving advice to a brand new writer, someone very new to it, I would caution them against that,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they
No.
probably, that one's a hard thing to know
When.
how often to use. And if the dialogue is already coming off just a little bit wooden or a little bit stilted, and you throw the character's name in there
Yeah.
that they're speaking to,
Yeah.
it really makes it seem artificial.
It
And I
works.
would, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say it works good with kids. If you're writing kid dialogue, like 2 kids talking, you find
Yeah.
that the kids will use each other's name a lot. Like just throwing that, like again, I think it really comes down to like what you're saying is absolutely accurate. You don't want to use it as a reason.
Yeah, and let me preface. I should probably preface everything that I say on this podcast with pretty much the only grade level, like I read some young adult, but almost everything that I write as read and write as adult.
Right. Right.
I'm not reading. I haven't read a middle grade book in a very, very long time. I don't read anything younger than that for sure. So my knowledge of the expectations and all that stuff for those levels,
Yeah.
I'm totally off the mark. So
Yeah.
if you write middle grade or younger, don't listen to a damn word I have to say, because I don't know what I'm talking about any of that.
I do agree with you, though. I think if you're a first time writer, regardless of what age group you're writing for, all the things that we're talking about here are tips and tricks. And maybe you don't do this, maybe you do also do that. But, like, don't try to use all of them at once. You know what I mean? Just do what feels natural to you. But, like, if you find yourself in a corner, you could be like, okay, maybe I could use this. Or if you're having trouble cracking a scene, normally if you're writing dialogue, or if you're a writer, even if it's your first book, chances are most writers love writing dialogue. Very few writers are like, oh, the worst part is the dialogue. Most of us love to hear our characters speak, and be spoken to. So it inherently kind of becomes, the gravy on the potatoes. Like that's the part that you're really excited about. So again, like Wesley is so smartly said, don't take everything we say to heart. It's just, these are our opinions. I don't know.
And we don't know shit about fuck.
No, we don't. All right. Well, Wesley, thank you for talking to me about talking today. It was a good conversation.
I'm all talked out.
I am too. No more dialogue. No more dialogue. All right. If anybody wants to get Me and the Machine, Wesley, where would they go?
Didn't I just say I was talked out?
Amazon, people. Go to Amazon. Unless his website is up and going and in the comments.
By the time this episode is up, it better be. Otherwise, I'm really slacking on.
And then for
Which
myself,
will be WesleyWatts.com.
WesleyWatts.com. Beautiful, beautiful. And then go to Harms Publications for any of my stuff. Please like, comment, follow, subscribe, download, share, whatever. Thumbs
Yell at
down,
us.
thumbs up. Yeah, whatever. But we appreciate y'all listening to us, and join us next time on Fiction in Focus. Bye.